is the issue of problems. We don't like to talk about problems. We don't like to avoid problems. We don't like to deal with problems. In fact, I think most of us would probably say, I want to be in a world where there is no problems. But here's the reality, and we know this, and you know this, I know this, my team knows this. Problems are here to stay. People just generally are imperfect, so we're always going to have problems. And then even beyond that, things happening outside of what we have control over cause problems on what we do control. But we were talking this morning, and there were some interesting perspectives that came out regarding this idea of problems. What do we do with it? And how do we deal with them more effectively as a leader? And I want to share with you kind of the 5P's that we talked about this morning that I think are relevant to everybody, whether you're a leader or not, doesn't matter. The point is that we need to do a better job of understanding the value of problems and how to deal with problems on a more appropriate or consistent basis. So I want to walk you through, generally speaking, these 5P's that we chatted about. And the first one is this idea of proximity. And think about it this way: the closer you are to a problem, the closer you are to understanding what's really going on, the greater focus you can have on solving that problem. Now that makes a ton of sense. But there's a couple of perspectives that I want you, or a couple of points that I want you to really take away from this thing, though. So think about what I just said. The closer you are to a problem, the greater proximity you have to a problem, the more informed decision you can make about this. Now, I'm talking to leaders specifically, because we hear something like that, and it's like, okay, I got to get to know my people better. I got to know the problems that they're dealing with, and that is true. But in every leader's journey, there comes a time where your teams are too big, and you really can't get to know all the problems that your team is facing. The concept behind this is, if proximity allows you to make better decisions about what's going on, then should you be making that decision, or should that decision be made by somebody with closer proximity to the actual problem? I ask leaders this all the time. I asked my team this morning. I've asked some other leaders last week the same question. Think about the problems that come across your desk that you're asked to solve on a daily basis. Are they the right problems? And what I mean by that is, depending on your role, depending on the leadership role that you have, the level of problems you're dealing with, if you're dealing with all levels, could be robbing your team from their ability to take ownership in those problems in the first place. Look, if I'm deciding whether we pay 79 cents or 89 cents for a pen, if that is the problem that I'm dealing with as the CEO of an organization, I'm dealing with the wrong problems. The people with proximity to that problems are completely somebody else. So the first thing I would challenge you is to say, are you dealing with the problems? Do you have the proximity to the problems that you're dealing with? Are they at the level that you should be dealing with? Are you robbing that ability to problem solve, to be close to the problem, to create the solutions from your people? Generally, because we're a bit of a control freak, right? We've got to understand that the proximity makes a huge difference. Number two is our perspective of problems in general. There's two perspectives that I think you and I both need to have. Number one, problems are not going away. Our role as leaders, as individuals, is to deal with the problems. And that is not to be a doom and gloom discussion. But problems are a reality of life. Some we can control, some we can't, but both that we have to deal with. And it's like anything. If you set the expectation that I'm going to deal with problems, the magnitude of those problems continues to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So our perspectives need to shift from, oh my gosh, I got a problem, the sky is falling, to, look, there's problems that are going to come across, and I'm going to deal with the right level of problems, but I'm going to deal with problems on a consistent basis. That's perspective number one. Perspective number two that I think we all need to have is that there is always, let me repeat that, there is always an answer to every problem. Now, it doesn't mean you like the answer, but if we walk into with the perspective of, we're going to have problems, there is always an answer to every problem. There's an answer, there's a decision we're going to make to address that particular problem. If we have that perspective leading into it, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. When we go into it with a bit of a woe is me, which we'll talk about here in a second, our perspective about the problem takes this molehill and makes it into a mountain because we have the wrong perspective about the problems themselves. So number one, we've got to think about the proximity we have. Are we dealing with the right level of problems? Are we close to that problem? Should we be delegating that problem to somebody else? And it's not to give them the problem, it's to teach them how to deal with the problem. Number two, we've got to have these perspectives. We've got to have the perspective problems are going to happen, but there is a solution, there's an answer to every problem. The third one is a word that is often used, but I think misunderstood. And that's this idea of pragmatism when it comes to solving a problem. What is pragmatism? Pragmatism is separating the emotion and being very factual about the problem and what's going on. There's a model that I've taught on video before, which is the 4F's: facts, feelings, focus, fruit. The idea of pragmatism is to have a very structured process, simple but structured, deals with the facts and gets to a solution. So let's think about this. What are the facts of the problem? As human beings, we have the focus, or we generally respond emotionally first. We're emotional beings. That's what helps us make decisions. In fact, that's really the only part of our brain that allows us to truly make a real decision. But we respond emotionally, which obviously throws problems into a light that they're huge. Everybody's running from the problem. If you have a team, your team is running from your response, and so on. But a pragmatic approach to problems is like this. Number one, what are the facts to the situation? Let's deal with that specifically. Sure, I'm going to acknowledge my feelings, but I'm going to deal with my facts. Acknowledge the feelings, and then I'm going to think about my focus. What do we want out of it? What's the goal? So if I've pissed off a customer, if that is the issue, that is my problem. The facts are, this is what happened, this is how it happened. Sure, I feel upset. Sure, the client feels upset. But then the next step is going to be focus. What do I want out of this? Do I want to solve the problem? Do I want to make my customer happy? And then the last piece of this is the fruit, is what's the first step that I can take today to make that right, to hit that goal? That is a pragmatic approach to problem solving. I'll give you another example. There's this concept of pragmatic marketing. And if you think about marketing, we like to make things look cool. But if they look cool and nobody cares because nobody's interacting, it's not working, yet then we take something else that we think looks horrible, but the data suggests, the facts suggest that people are engaging with it, that people want to see more of that. We often look at that and go, but it looks horrible. Pragmatic marketing would say, follow the facts, follow the numbers, deal with it in a very pragmatic, non-emotional way, and you'll win just about every time. You'll deal with that problem and create a solution where everybody generally is going to be happy. Now, the fourth thing that happens that kind of causes problems to get bigger is the fourth P, and that's pride. We have a tendency to get caught up in ourselves and respond or take actions that actually take problems and make these problems bigger. And a couple of them. Number one, we lose perspective. Those two perspectives around, hey, we're always going to have problems and there's always an answer. When we lose that perspective, it's easy for things to go awry. And we're losing that perspective because we're kind of inserting ourselves as more important than the situation we have to deal with in the first place. The second thing is if we make a decision or respond to that problem without really looking at our personal values, our company values, we ultimately take actions that may not be in the best interest, in fact, make that problem bigger than what it started, because we're not following what we truly value or what our company truly values. The third thing is, look, losing your sense of humor. When people that don't have a sense of humor, when problems happen, you can see it on their face, you can see how they react, they get very anxious about it. Look, we're going to have problems. You got to have a little bit of humor behind it, even when it's something serious, so that you can take a step back from your emotions and deal with the perspective or deal with the pieces around the pragmatic approach to it. What are the facts of the situation itself? And number 4 in this idea of pride is when problems happen, we often feel sorry for ourselves. As I referenced earlier, we get into the woe is me. Instead of focusing on the facts of what's going on, the perspective that there's always an answer, it becomes woe is me, why it's me, and so forth. And the 5th one that we often respond to, or it creates actions that make problems worse under this idea of pride, is we begin to blame others. Common reaction to problems. It's your fault. Does it matter? Sure, we can deal with that later. But shouldn't we want to solve the problem first? We get all this anxiety and all this emotion, and we try to pass blame, and it's really our pride that's getting in the way. We've got to determine who's got the proximity to the problem. Is it you? Is it somebody else? We've got to have a perspective that says there's always an answer. We're always going to have problems. And that's not to be negative. That's just the way reality is. We've got to have a pragmatic approach to solving these problems. And if you're a leader, we've got to be showing that to our teams, that we don't respond emotionally, we respond with pragmatism. And then we check our pride at the door, and we don't make problems worse by blaming others, by some of these others, by losing our perspective, and so forth. And the last P in this whole thing, when we get this right, is progress. When we handle problems the right way, problems are going to occur. And we evaluate the experience. Let me say that again. We often go through life with all these experiences around us, dealing with problems and so forth, but then we repeat them over and over and over because we don't take the time to stop and evaluate that experience. It's the evaluation that drives our growth. It's the evaluation that drives our personal progress, the progress of our teams. Look, it's easier said than done. I get it. We hate dealing with problems. But if we have the right view of what's going on, if we have the right approach to dealing with problems, problems make us better. Problems create the growth exponentially that we often see. If we were successful in everything we did, we wouldn't change anything that we do, and there would be no growth because there'd be no reason for growth. Think about it. Problems create progress when we deal with them the right way. Now, I hope this was helpful to you. There's a couple of other perspectives I'm going to share after I walk my team through this, but it kept coming up, and then I got a call from a client of mine this morning that was dealing with a problem and was actually exhibiting the signs of pride that I just talked about. And after not giving him direction, but after asking him questions, he was able to take a step back from the emotional side of what was going on, look at it pragmatically, realize that there's always a solution, realize that he shouldn't be making the decision, that he had somebody with closer proximity that he wasn't allowing to make decisions. And he realized after that conversation that addressing the problem he had with dealing with the problem provided him with some much needed growth. I hope this conversation does the same for you.